This is Jeff Abiad. Welcome back to Where the Rubber Meets the Road. If you haven't already listened to our episode 2 interview with Vivian Stephen, you'll want to go back and listen to that first. This episode is our question and response based on that episode, and wow, did we hit the ground running. You guys got deep quick with your questions, and I think you're going to find Vivian's perspective super helpful as we navigate some fairly sensitive topics. I'm so grateful to Vivian and all of our guests for being so willing to share out of their personal experience. So here we go. Enjoy this Q&R of episode 2 with Vivian Stephen.
Thank you so much for your vulnerability and just sharing what you went through and like your past. But I guess I know you mentioned that you had a struggle with pornography.
Yep.
So I was just wondering how you overcame that and like if you have any tips, I guess, for just living a pure life in word, thought, and deed.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I even talked about that a few times to a lot of men in our church. There's 2 parts to that. One was we had like prayers that heal the heart. It was a course in the church at that time where every action has a root, right? So we need to figure out what the root is. So for me, the root was some judgments that I had. So I had to like really go through a lot of forgiveness. So that was the starting point.
And you were walking that with some other people too that you were going
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a group of people that we went through that with. So forgiveness is a good starting point because ultimately the person that hurt you it's your judgment is what is holding you back. The more you let go, the more it heals. So that's step 1. The other one is accountability. Like even right now, like in my phone, I have protections to prevent me from going to certain places. Even now, I don't trust myself because when that dopamine or whatever the stuff that goes through your head, I've known pastors that have told this story where they've been clean for like years and then they've had to go through it again. So it's not like, oh, I'm clean, so I'm going to be clean always. Always good to have protections around you. And my wife knows my password. There's nothing I try to keep hidden, just for checks and balance. Like if you are single and if you just have a buddy, just talk to him and say, hey, I'm going to put a protection on this, but you know the password. So that, at least you know that you can't go anywhere without his, if it's a legitimate site, of course he's going to allow you to put it in. But you know what I mean? So yeah, I have to keep boundaries for myself. And Joyce Meyer talks about this too, is even with Paul, remember it talks about the thorn in his flesh, right? And it doesn't talk about what the thorn is. I think that's deliberate in God's point because everybody has something that they're struggling with. And I mean, this day and age, pornography is a very common one, but it could be anything, right? So that is your boundary, right? But God didn't say he'll always take it away from you. He said, my grace is sufficient for you. So I'm like, God, why don't you just take this away, this desire away? I mean, in some cases he does, right? And there have been so many people who have been free and they don't have any urges anymore. But for some people, this is your boundary. You have to stay within your boundary if you want to. So certain times, like when I go to the bathroom, I don't take my phone. Even I'm married now, right? I should be free, but it's always good to have boundaries. Certain situations that is trigger points, don't do it. We live in an imperfect world. There's imperfection. So if somebody really wants to do it, they can. It's not like you can't, but you just have to put enough boundaries that it'll at least check you, right? Because again, when you put somebody into like a prison-like thing, then you're just doing it because you're in prison, not necessarily because you. So there are, again, you try to put as much boundaries as you can around you, but then the more important thing is is to have accountability partners and prayer and God.
I
Yeah.
think it's wise, like, to be honest with yourself, with God, and with other people.
Hmm.
And I think, like you said, we can all find a way
Right.
to do what to skirt whatever boundaries we put in our lives. So it's like
Yeah.
a tool, but outside of,
Hmm.
you're going to need to invite the Lord in that space and other people.
Exactly.
And I don't know how you felt about this, but I often think too, like in church culture, we need to be careful that we don't get to a place where we feel like once I've overcome something, like you said, oh, it's not an issue anymore. And then what happens?
Hmm.
And I think there's that devastating feeling of like, oh, what if I had like 15 years later and then
Hmm.
what? I can't tell anybody this now. I already did that.
Yep.
And now it feels like this whole failure. And I
Hmm.
think, like you said,
Yeah.
having that still regular check-in, even
Hmm.
for somebody that feels like they're
Yeah.
well past it.
And these are like grown gentlemen, and they have accountability with each other. And they see, and that's the thing with God is God gives us points of weaknesses because He wants us to depend on Him, right? And so, like when I have these urges, or when I have situations where I've gotten close, that's the point where I know I'm not close to God at this point. Like something's going on. So I like, okay, time to like reconnect with God because something's going on. And so if I fall, then at least I don't be like, and that's another thing that's important to know is if you fall, if you're in that situations where you're going through this and you're trying to come out of it, have grace with yourself. Because the worst thing you can do, or at least the worst thing for me, is what I can do is, man, you're dumb. You're never gonna amount to anything. Don't say that. God, and if I hear that voice in my head, and again, it happens all the time. It's like, especially when I do something crazy or silly and stuff, I'm like, man, that's so silly. How could you do something like that, right? So man, that's a stupid thing to do. Something like that in terms of you're like your worst critic.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point where I have to check myself. So is that the voice of God or is the voice of the enemy? Okay. I have to constantly say, okay, in Jesus' name, go away. It happens even the other day. There was some situations where I was like really hard on myself. And I was like, man, you call yourself a Christian? You can't be doing stuff like this or something like that. I'm like, this is something that God would say.
Right.
I mean, you're hearing these voices in your head, but it's really not from God. So the enemy is always like poking you and making you, I've already prayed. God already healed me. I don't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah, that's the amazing part about the cross. Is
It's
done.
amazing what the blood of Jesus can do. And it's like, they call it, somebody was talking about, it's called living sacrifice. Because a sacrifice that's dead is not going to get away from that place of surrender. A living sacrifice, you have to constantly go back to that place of surrender, right? Because you're going to get off the place of surrender. So it's you have to like constantly get yourself back to that place of
and
of
seeing your
surrender.
identity in Christ, I think, is really crucial too. And I think about my kids because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they'll say those comments out loud about themselves, like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, yeah, I'm so dumb," or "I can't believe I did
Yep.
this," or "I'll never," whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like their dad. I'm like, "No, that's not true.
Yep.
Don't say those things."
Mm-hmm.
And I think, oh, if that's my heart as a dad, how much more for God,
Exactly.
over us.
Yep.
You mentioned about forgiveness and like the abuse. Could you talk more about how you navigated that and like any strategies, or what did you lean into to be able to let that go and find healing and peace within yourself?
Yeah. So two things was hearing testimony of other people having done this, and was helpful in terms of, okay, if somebody else can do this, I think I can forgive. That was one in my situation. And then I saw what it was doing to me,
Yeah.
right? And I didn't like what it was doing to me, right? Because, like when I think about even now it's like weird thinking about it, but back then it was like you needed something to escape that, right? So pornography or things that would cause you to escape it was what you wanted to do, right? The main thing that helped me was the regular time of worship with God, right? Like sometimes I can't do this too much nowadays, but like literally, like I'll get in my car, I'd put worship music on, and it'll just take me to a place. And sometimes I'd be like this in the car, and I don't care, right? Because, that's my escape, right? I think there's some place where it talks about do not be drunk with wine, but be drunk with the Spirit, because you are going to submit to something. At least in my situation, I'm choosing to focus on God, right? That was a big help. I literally had to say, I'm going to forgive. No matter what, I'm going to forgive this person. So I literally had to come to a place where it's like, I forgive this person, or I forgive what happened to me, right? I cannot control what happened to me, but I can control my response to what happened to me, right? So that's kind of how I dealt with the situation. Again, there's no perfect way of this is the way it would work for everybody, but for me, music was like the escape. Always, I can put music on and go to places, in terms of my mind and everything. So when I found worship music and cool worship music, I was like, wow, I didn't know there was good worship music in this world. I mean, nowadays there's so many good music that, if you want Christian rock, Christian pop, Christian hip hop even, there's so many music that's so great. I'm like, wow, why didn't I have this growing up? For some people, it's journaling. For some people, it's just speaking truth to yourself, right? Like, what are you in God? Like, I'm a child of God. I'm loved. I am, whatever it is that, verses and I actually have a verse, a thing in my cube at work where it talks about, hey, what is the world telling you are, and what is God? Different ways that I'm trying to if I hear a voice that I feel like is negative, and I catch it, and when I catch it, I was like, in Jesus' name, this is not gonna be my story. I'm gonna choose to focus on God. So again, everybody's in a journey. You may be in a different place of going through that forgiveness process, but you have a choice, right? And the choice, believe me, on the other end is so much freedom of forgiveness.
I think, really regularly tuning into the voice of God in whatever circumstance, and being aware of yourself, your reaction. I was thinking when you brought it up of a circumstance that we went through where somebody had wronged us deliberately and awfully, and I was building my case. These are the things, and this is how we're going to combat it. And I had the file folder on my computer of all the documentation and the ways that I was going to prove that this had happened. And I was consumed by it, and oh, okay, because I was wrong. I was wronged,
Yeah.
And at some point, I really felt like the Lord told me to let it go, just release it, because of what it was doing to me. It's that, and I can't remember the name of the phenomenon, but I need to learn it. Somebody had spoken about this. I can't remember it, but it's that concept of when you invest so much into something that you feel like you have to see it through. Like if you spend X amount of dollars to take your family to Disney World, and you get there and it's hot and you've been there for 3/4 of the day and you're all miserable, and it would be so much better for your health and well-being to just go home to the hotel, but you've spent so much money that you're we're going to enjoy the heck out of this day, and then you're miserable because of that. And it's that concept of just learn to, we're here's where I am right now. I try to tell my kids this all the time, because that's what I'm trying to learn is what's happened I can't change.
Yep.
But what I do right now, I can change, and I don't need to carry that.
Amen. Yeah.
But
That
it's
is
hard.
true.
It
Yeah.
takes a lot of maturity.
Yeah, I think when somebody showed this picture of, let's say you have a piece of paper, right? If that piece of paper is here, you can see the whole room, right? If that piece of paper is here, you can't see anybody, right? So the more focus you're giving that situation or that thing, no matter what had happened, but the more you're totally focused on it, that's all you can think about. You can't think about anything else. So the more you focus on other things, whether it's prayer or Bible study or journaling or worship music or whichever way that you can focus on something else other than what you're going through, that's a big help too. Yeah,
That's great.
All right. Somebody has to ask about the arranged marriage. So I'm a half Indian, and I've got a fair number of aunties who are want me to pursue that option. Yep. I'm against it for my own reasons, but I was curious to think if I imagine there are a lot of other Christians who come from a background where that's an option. What is your advice for them contemplating that? And then also, do you believe arranged marriages can constitute the foundation of a godly relationship?
One thing that's very, very important to know is love is not a feeling. For instance, when I first became a Christian, that was a high. Believe me, it was consuming. That's all I could think about. And then there were days like now where there's this Bible app with a streak that you can do. Sometimes I'd lose my streak. I'm like, how could I go a whole day without reading my Bible? Right? And so love is a choice, right? So it doesn't matter who you marry in that sense of, is it love marriage? Is it arranged marriage? In Indian culture, you have to choose to love the person because you get one conversation. Okay, the way this works, again, for those who don't know, let's say there's a situation where you feel like, okay, now is the time I want to get married. So you tell your parents and you tell them the kind of person you're looking for. And of course, they have their own ideas, right? So they are the ones who are going to be going and looking. The way they do that is they go to the church and say, my son is interested. They put it on these online sites. They call it matrimony sites.
Oh, Lord.
They literally put a biodata, something like that. They tell you where you work, how tall you are, how heavy you are. I don't know what else they put. I haven't seen it. My parents did all this. And so then people approach them, or people, respond by email or whatever it is. They respond on these online journal sites, matrimony sites. And so they go through all those resumes or biodatas, whatever it is. Then what they do, once they picked a few, they would actually put feelers out, like talk to the families, because they're like family of family of family of family. Okay, so it's usually those kinds of situations where you go and figure out like, well, how's the family like? How are the friends like? They're finding out all these things about who you're going to be with. Then they'll tell you, these are the 2 or 3 that we think would be right for you. So you get to pick sometimes not. They pick for you. Again, depending on certain cultures, like in Hindu culture, it's astrology is involved. They have like signs and, zodiac signs. They look at all that stuff and see how long their name is, there's so many weird things going on, okay? Again, Christian circles, they don't do that, thank God. But they do talk to the family, and you get one conversation. So either you go to their house and, you get to go and talk to the person, and that's it. You get to decide if you get to spend the rest of your life with that person. How do you know? Because you pray, and then you go, but what if you make the wrong decision? You don't know. But the whole point is that it's not a matter of who you marry, it's a matter of choice. This is the person that God gave me. I'm going to choose to love this person. That's our culture, right? And again, there are situations with the old way of culture where, it's all male dominated. So, a lot of men from the culture are like, women have to be submissive. And of course, they take it to the extreme. Respect is not there. So women are starting to rebel now. So you see a lot more divorces now. Of course, that doesn't make the news. But in Indian cultures too, there's a lot of divorce now. Even in my own family, I'm like, how is this even happening? And so they look at me, and I'm the black sheep in the family that fell in love and got married. And literally on the day of my wedding, my mom calls me and she's crying, literally bawling on the phone saying, don't do it.
Oh, wow.
What do you do with that? And I'm from a culture where you respect your mom and dad. And so for me, it was heartbreaking to hear that. But I knew this was from God. And at some point, I had to make a decision. Do I go with honoring my parents? Am I really dishonoring them, or am I obeying God? So I really had to pray a lot to really make sure that I make the distinction right? Because our pastor, the church, not this pastor, but the church pastor at that time said, follow your parents, honor your parents. So I'm like, oh boy. And my parents are like, nope, not in this church, over my dead body, you're going to marry this person, right? So what do you do with that, right? So at some point, when I knew this was 100% from God, and I knew this was going to hurt them, I had to really like kind of harden my heart for that situation of saying, okay, I know they're going to be hurt, but I know they'll come around because they love me. And now we're actually going to 2 weeks time. We're going there to see, and my mom praises my wife to everybody of how great she is and stuff like that. But it was a process. My point is both can work. My brother has been married for 20 years, something like that. Arranged marriage. He got one conversation. He's doing fine. The love keeps growing. The more you get to know the other person, the love keeps growing. In my situation too, the love keeps growing. Like every time I see my wife, my heart beats, I tell my wife, it's beating faster now, right? But you constantly have to make a choice. Divorce is not the answer. It's not even in my vocabulary. In some cases, we don't argue. Again, we argue, but not like fight, right? My kids say we fight, but we argue, So in terms of like, the way we do things are different, right? There's two different people, two different habits and things. Like, I don't know, when we were doing counseling, the pastor was saying how you put your toilet paper, like on top or like from the bottom, could be different, and it could annoy you, right? He's like, why would you want to put it this way? This way is more efficient, But I mean, for us, we were the same. But the point he was trying to make is little things can annoy you, and it could lead to arguments and stuff. And you're like, why are you arguing? But it could be little things. So one of the guys who was married like 30 years, he told me, don't sweat the little stuff. There are going to be little stuff. And so there's going to be an adjustment period where there are certain ways of you doing things, certain way of your wife doing things, like whether it's like temperature too. Like sometimes you may like it hot. She may like it cold. At some point, you have to make a decision. Who's going to win this? Happy
We just
wife.
passive aggressively change the thermostat. Sneak over to the wall.
Yeah, there you go. And see, here's the thing, right? I do so much for my wife. When it comes to big decisions, if I make the decision, she'll be like, okay. And my kids will say, why he gets to make the decision? Women should be able to make the same decision. This is the way God made things. So I have to be in a place where she can respect me enough to say, yep, I will go with this decision. So I have to be a person of honor. So if I say it's going to be my way or the highway, she'll be out of here. You know what I mean? So my wife, she loves sushi, right? So the way I can love her is I take her out to sushi. It's hard on my wallet, but it's what she loves, right? She would sometimes look at me and say, why did I deserve to be with you? I'm like, I'm married to a supermodel. What are you talking about? I got more out of this deal than you. Put God in the center. In spite of all the differences, compromise is important. And again, this is important to know. If you're two type A personalities, it is going to be hard, right? I'm a type B. My wife's a type A, right? So for us, I'm like, okay, whatever. One of our first arguments was what I wear. My wife wanted to pick what I wear. I'm like, it's me that's wearing it. What does it matter? She wanted to pick. At some point, I'm like, okay, forget this. This is sweating the little stuff. I don't care what I wear. I just wanted to win this argument, right? Nowadays, she's like, okay, you wear whatever you want.
I don't have the time.
She doesn't have the time. Right? But compromise is important, right? So in any situation, and again, it could be a dating relationship or something. Remember, you have to compromise. Like when you're dating, you're always trying to be the best version of yourself. Okay? That's not always going to be the case, right? So the way you would know the other person is how are they treating their families? How are they treating their friends? Look at those things. Don't just focus on that one person and what they're doing to you and this is the greatest person in the world. How is this person treating? How is this person's relationship with God? Are they praying? Are they even reading the Bible? If I ask tough questions about God, Is he even like trying to answer them? Or he's like, oh, that's too much for me. I don't know what they say. You know what I mean? Is there a maturity? If there's not, be friends. Don't start off with, okay, let's date. Be friends. That's the best advice my mom gave me is, hey, when it comes to girls, till you're in like college or working and stuff, be friends. And even then, even afterwards, I try to protect myself as much as I can, or I did, until I was in a place where I knew this was from God. And then I'm like, I knew this was going to go against my parents, but I'm going to choose this, God, because of you, no matter what. And then, of course, we went through a lot of pain and suffering again. Literally, I would pick up the phone at 6 p.m. after I come back from work. My mom would start talking. She would talk till 10 o'clock sometimes. I would literally put the phone down, do something, come back, pick it up, and she'll be talking. Literally, this has happened for days sometimes, where she would just call and again, I love my mom. So I don't want to like disrespect her. So I'd still pick it up. I'd still talk to her. But, what do you do? She has to process it. So whenever I get the chance, I'll say, look, I'm not doing this to disrespect you. I'm doing this because I'm trying to honor God. But she doesn't see it that way. Well, what do? You just let it play out, unfortunately.
It did make me think, though, of like arranged marriages in Scripture. When you think about Abraham and his son Isaac. But I was also thinking about Esther, who we look at as this hero of faith. And the way that she came into being queen there was a lot of weird situations there that do not seem ideal for coming into marriage. Like being the second wife, being part of a harem that wasn't even married. You know what I mean? It was not like, this is from the Lord. This is like, this is super weird and odd. And this does not seem like God's way. And still God used it. And I think, like you said, intention, care. I had a pastor tell me once, because in the culture that I grew up, it was very much like, God has one person for you, and you better get it right. And he was like, once you're married, that's God's person for you. Exactly. So you can pray, God can lead you to somebody. I believe God totally does that. But also, like, my parents met in a bar, and neither of them were saved at the time, and God's using them too. And so I think, intention, care, God will use it.
As we've been through now in this conversation, you do a lot. So you have your job, you have family, including some younger kids, all of them still at home. And then you also do I think 5 things at the church. You're everywhere and you, teleport through the church, I'm pretty sure. So I'm curious how you balance those things. Obviously, it's important to you to serve at the church, or that's evident, I think, from what you do. So how you've kind of tried to balance those things throughout the years.
When my kids were young, we would just have these dance sessions where we would just put like Chris Tomlin, what's that?
God's
Passion.
Great Dance Floor.
Passion, God's Great Dance Floor. We just put it and we'll just dance. Because they're not old enough to understand, and I can't be explaining the greater things of God to them. So I would read to them and stuff like that. It doesn't take too much in terms of when you're there, just be there, right? So at least that's the way I look at it. So when I'm there with them. And for them, it's maybe an hour. When they were young, of course, it's more time. So even when I'm tired, because music was something that I could do, that I can relate to, right? My wife she's just from God. She was a nanny before, and she took care of kids when she was like a kid too. So she's got this thing down, right? I got no clue. Even now, I don't pick up anybody's kid. I'm so scared I'm going to drop this kid. So when I had kids of my own, I'm like, how am I going to even hold this kid? But, God, when it's your own, it's different, right? I try to at least spend half an hour to an hour with them, okay, when they were young. Nowadays, they don't want to spend time.
You're texting them like, please.
They would literally text me from downstairs and say, Dad, can you approve this app for me? I'm like, come up here.
Yeah.
So the way I do things is we have a time of Bible study once a week. Okay, so that is kind of dedicated to them to answer questions and stuff like that, right? Outside of that, I would just go give them a hug. I would just ask, like, go to their room and just sit down and say, what's going on? How was your day? They'll be like, good. Okay, what did you do? Stuff. All right, I need to know what stuff. I'm not going there anywhere until you tell me. Eventually, they'll start talking. And then once they start, it just flows. Right? So I do that. Do I spend hours and hours? No. They don't expect that from me. When they need me, I try to be there for them. And then the Bible study, right? That's our time. And it's funny because when I first started it, I was like, are they too young to do this? But then I'm like, well, let's do it. What's the worst that can happen? It's the Bible, right? So what we do is we would read a scripture, like one chapter and everybody goes and reads a verse. And then once we're done reading, pick a verse that stood out to you and let's talk about it. So they would pick a verse and then we would just talk about that verse. We would go on tangents and end up somewhere else, but it's just a time for conversation. It wasn't like, do we do it all the time, every week? The kids are busy, they have stuff, but I try to focus and make sure we have at least an hour focused on God. Other than that, I tell them, hey, have some time with God. Tell me about what God's been speaking to you. So something like that. Mm-hmm. But then otherwise, I'm just asking them questions. And I'm do you guys know about the love languages? Right? So my love language is physical touch. So I would go and hug them and kiss them. And, they're like, Dad, why are you doing this? Mm-hmm. That's just the way I communicate love. So I
think one of the things that you do very well, even to speak more to Deborah, the rest of Deborah's question, is living with an open hand. Mm-hmm. That I admire about you very much. And it's some of what you've already alluded to and talked about when it's like, oh, well, I had an intention that this would happen, that my wife would just realize that we were destined to be together and it didn't happen that way, or that I thought this was going to happen. I submitted it to the Lord and then whatever, or same thing with your time or the way that you serve. And we talked about how many you do multiple things and all that stuff. And I think that what you do very well is exactly what you said. I'm here, so I'm here. I'm going to invest the time into what's in front of me. This is what I'm doing, and you're very joyful doing it. And I very much appreciate that about you.
Thank you.
And your family. And I see it in your wife and in your kids. And I just love the way that you lead them very well. And the heart that you have to serve this church and the way that you truly lead by serving. Mm-hmm. It's not like I need a position or I need a title or whatever. It's like whatever you're doing 100% and you're leading by the way that you do it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really great. So thanks for being vulnerable today, for answering all these questions. And, we'll hang out. We'll have some more time to talk. Mm-hmm. But thank you, everybody, for asking your questions and being so attentive. It's wonderful. So let's give it up for Vivian tonight. Thank you.
Appreciate you guys.
Well, I can't say enough how grateful I am to Vivian for coming down to the C3 Garage, for giving us a glimpse into his life and his personal experience, and answering everybody's questions. That was so great. If you joined us in person when we recorded these, you know our next guest is someone very special who also spends a lot of time in the same space that we do downstairs at the church. I won't give it away if you don't already know, but you're going to want to tune in for our next episode with somebody you're going to like. In the meantime, if you want to join us for any of our events or our summer schedule, you can find all of the details at capitallife.org/C3. We'd love to have you join us anytime in person. We are meeting every week, or you can find us sitting up front all together on Sunday mornings at Capital Life. Can't wait to see you again at C3 in our garage. In the meantime, drive safe out there, everybody.